I never thought a simple act of trust could change my life forever. My name is Selena Pierce, and for years I believed in honesty, in love, and in loyalty. I always thought that love was straightforward. You give it, and it comes back. But sometimes, life has a way of showing you that what you trust most can become your greatest heartbreak. It all began on a rainy evening. The sky had been gray all day, and by evening, the rain came pouring down in sheets, tapping against my apartment windows like a warning I couldn't yet understand. I came home earlier than usual, hoping for a quiet night with him, just the two of us, a simple dinner, and maybe a movie. It sounded ordinary, but ordinary was all I wanted. He greeted me with that familiar smile, the one that used to make my heart skip a beat. But tonight it felt different, forced, almost calculating, as if he were hiding something behind that perfect, casual grin. I tried to shake it off. Maybe I was imagining things, but then I noticed it. His phone, buzzing again and again on the counter, slightly hidden as if hoping I wouldn't see. My heart sank. I shouldn't have looked, I told myself, but curiosity got the better of me. A text preview flashed across the screen. I couldn't see the full message, but the words were enough to send a chill down my spine. I tried to ignore it. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was overthinking. That was my mistake, because deep down I knew my gut was never wrong. That night, sleep didn't come. Every buzz of his phone felt like a secret being kept from me, like tiny cracks were forming in the life I thought I knew. The next morning, I woke with a determination I hadn't felt before. I couldn't pretend anymore. I had to know the truth, no matter how much it hurt. I told myself I was looking for clarity, for understanding, not to judge, but to protect myself. But the truth I would uncover, it would change everything. It started with small things. Patterns that I had ignored for months suddenly became glaringly obvious. Late nights at work, phone calls he always took in private, trips he claimed were urgent but vague. And then there were the little lies, the ones that seemed harmless at first, like forgetting to mention who he had lunch with, or saying he had meetings that didn't exist. I tried to be rational. Maybe it's nothing, I whispered to myself in the mirror, trying to calm the growing storm in my chest. But I couldn't. Something about the way he avoided my gaze, the way he always seemed a step ahead of my questions. It all felt like a puzzle, and I was slowly starting to see the picture. I remember one particular evening vividly. I had gone out to pick up some groceries, and when I returned, the apartment felt different, quieter than usual. The kind of quiet that makes you notice things you've never noticed before. I saw him sitting on the couch, pretending to read a book, but his hands were shaking slightly. The phone was buzzing again. And this time, I couldn't ignore it. I took a deep breath and asked him casually, "Who's texting you all the time?" He smiled, that same practiced smile, and said, "Just a friend from work, nothing important." But I could tell. I could feel it. There was fear in his eyes, not the fear of being caught in an innocent mistake, but the fear of someone finally realizing the truth. That night, I decided that I wouldn't let him hide anything from me ever again. I started paying attention, observing every detail. I watched his reactions to messages, the subtle glances when he thought I wasn't looking. I listened to every word he said, searching for inconsistencies, lies hidden in plain sight. And slowly, the picture started coming together. It wasn't easy. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine. But another part, the part that had been hurt before, the part that knew the price of blind trust, wouldn't allow me to look away. I realized then that sometimes, knowing the truth is more important than living in ignorance, even if that truth is painful. By the end of that week, I had made a decision. I couldn't confront him blindly. I had to be prepared. I needed to understand everything before taking action. I needed to know just how deep this went. And so I began a quiet investigation, not out of suspicion alone, but out of self-preservation. I would uncover every secret, every lie, every betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden. Because one thing was clear, I could never go back to the person I was before. Little did I know, this journey would not only reveal his betrayal, but would also uncover parts of myself I hadn't known existed. Strength I didn't know I had. Courage I thought I lacked. and a determination so fierce that it would change the course of my life forever. The days after that rainy evening became a careful balance between pretending everything was normal and quietly observing him. Every word he spoke, every gesture, every glance, it all mattered now. I was no longer just Selena Pierce, the trusting girlfriend. I had become someone sharper, more aware, a silent observer collecting pieces of a puzzle I never wanted to exist. It was during one of those quiet nights that I first discovered the depth of his deception. He had stepped out briefly, claiming he needed to grab something from a friend. The apartment was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the soft patter of rain outside. Curiosity pushed me forward. I couldn't help it anymore. I opened his laptop, careful to avoid leaving a trace. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Work emails, reminders, the usual clutter of someone's digital life. But then I noticed a folder labeled in a way that seemed innocuous, almost mundane. Something about it felt off. I clicked it. And there it was. A collection of messages, screenshots, and notes that revealed everything he had been hiding. Every lie he had told me over the past months was documented here. Every promise broken, every excuse, every "I love you" that was whispered with a hidden agenda. It all stared back at me. I froze. My heart raced. I felt a cocktail of emotions I couldn't immediately name: anger, disbelief, heartbreak, and a strange, burning need for justice. How could someone I loved so completely betray me in this way? How could he plan, manipulate, and lie so effortlessly, hiding behind smiles and reassurances while my trust was slowly chipped away? I remember reading one message over and over, unable to believe my eyes. It wasn't just a casual lie. This was deliberate, calculated deception. He had been weaving a story to cover his tracks, one that included not only his actions, but also manipulations designed to make me doubt myself. And somehow, I hadn't seen it coming. Not until now. The shock left me speechless, but my mind was already racing ahead. I knew that confronting him in a blind rage wouldn't solve anything. I had to plan, to strategize. I had to understand every detail of this betrayal. I had to ensure that when the moment came, I would be in control. I began piecing together timelines, cross-referencing messages with his claimed whereabouts. I even documented every small lie, every contradiction. Each new discovery fueled a mix of rage and determination. I wasn't just hurt. I was awakening to a sense of power I hadn't felt before. At times, I felt tears welling up, but I refused to let them fall. This was not the moment for weakness. This was the moment to observe, to understand, to prepare. And as I delved deeper, I realized something terrifying. This betrayal wasn't just about minor lies or fleeting deceit. It was about control, manipulation, and an undercurrent of selfishness that I had naively ignored. Evenings became the hardest. He would sit across from me, smiling, chatting casually, pretending as if nothing had changed. And I had to act normal. I laughed at his jokes, nodded at his stories, even shared small pieces of my own life, all while silently cataloging the truths he had hidden. Every detail mattered, and I became meticulous. Every slip of the tongue, every hesitation in his voice became a clue. One night, he left his phone unattended on the counter. My fingers itched to check it, but I held back. I reminded myself, patience was key. I needed the full picture before making any move. But the temptation was almost unbearable. I could feel the tension building, not just around him, but inside myself. I had never been more alert, more aware, more determined. Then came the moment that changed everything. A notification popped up on his laptop while he was out of the room. It revealed an entire network of lies I hadn't yet uncovered. Not just messages, but plans. Plans he had made to deceive me further, to manipulate people around me into believing his story, while leaving me to question my own judgment. I sank into the chair, my mind racing. I realized then that I had a choice. I could let this destroy me, let it break my spirit, or I could turn it into something that empowered me. That's when the spark of a plan ignited. Not revenge born from blind anger, but a carefully thought-out strategy to reclaim my dignity and show him the consequences of his betrayal. I started imagining the confrontation in my mind, the moment I would reveal everything I knew. I pictured his face, the shift in his expression when he realized that every lie, every deception, every hidden secret had been discovered. I felt a thrill of anticipation, not cruelty, but justice, a chance to finally regain control of a life that had been quietly manipulated. In those nights, I became more than Selena Pierce, the woman he thought he could deceive. I became someone who knew the truth, who was ready to act with precision and patience. And as I closed his laptop that night, my heart pounding, I knew one thing. The moment of reckoning was coming, and I would not be caught unprepared. After discovering the depth of his betrayal, I knew I couldn't act impulsively. My heart still ached, but I had learned that raw emotion could be a weakness if I wanted to reclaim control. I needed a plan, a careful, calculated approach to uncover every detail before confronting him. I began my investigation quietly. I observed him without letting him notice. I paid attention to the smallest things, how he answered messages, the times he suddenly became busy, the excuses he used to cover his tracks. Every gesture, every slip of the tongue became a clue in the larger puzzle of his deception. I started keeping a private journal. Every message I found, every inconsistency I noticed, I wrote down. Dates, times, locations, everything mattered. At first it felt obsessive, almost paranoid. But soon I realized that obsession was exactly what I needed. Without it, I could have missed details that would become crucial later. I also began to study his habits more closely. Patterns emerged. There were recurring late-night calls, unexplained absences, and the way he would always avoid certain topics. Each pattern told a story he didn't want me to see. And as the pieces started to come together, the bigger picture became horrifyingly clear. He wasn't just lying about little things. He had been carefully manipulating me, controlling what I saw and what I believed. He had created a life filled with illusions, a world where I was meant to trust blindly while he hid truths that could destroy our relationship. I knew then that if I wanted justice, I couldn't act without evidence. I needed proof, concrete, undeniable proof. So I became meticulous. I documented every interaction, captured screenshots, even noted the tone of his messages. It felt strange at first, almost clinical, but I understood that this was necessary. Without solid evidence, I would have nothing but suspicion, and suspicion alone wouldn't be enough. During this time, I also had to maintain the facade of normalcy. I smiled, laughed, and pretended everything was fine. I played the part of the unsuspecting girlfriend, the one who trusted him completely. It was exhausting, but it also gave me an edge. He never suspected that I was quietly collecting all the pieces that would eventually unravel his lies. There were moments when doubt crept in. Was I going too far? Could I forgive him if I confronted him now? But each time I remembered his betrayal, the broken promises, the hidden messages, the manipulation, I knew I couldn't turn back. I couldn't let him get away with it. One night, I discovered something that shocked me even further. Hidden in a folder labeled innocuously on his laptop was a series of messages he had deleted from his phone. They revealed a plan I hadn't yet anticipated, showing just how deep his deception ran. I felt a mix of anger and a strange sense of clarity. I now had the full picture, and with it, the power to act strategically. I started imagining different scenarios in my mind. How would I confront him? When would be the right moment? What would I say? I rehearsed the confrontation again and again, each time imagining him realizing that I knew everything, each time picturing the shock on his face. But I also reminded myself that this wasn't about anger or humiliation. It was about justice, about exposing the truth and reclaiming my dignity. I wanted him to understand the weight of his betrayal, to see the consequences of manipulating someone who had trusted him completely. I also prepared for the emotional aspect. I knew that facing him would be difficult. Seeing him lie, pretending to be innocent, would test my patience and resolve. But I had grown stronger during this period of observation. Each discovery, each hidden truth had strengthened me. I was no longer the person who would blindly trust. I had become someone who knew the truth and was ready to act. In those nights, alone with my thoughts, I realized something important. This betrayal had awakened a part of me I didn't know existed. A part that was strong, patient, and unyielding. a part that refused to be manipulated or silenced. And as I looked at the evidence I had collected, I felt a sense of empowerment I had never felt before. The pieces were finally coming together. Every lie, every manipulation, every hidden truth was documented. I was ready. I knew that when the moment came, I would have the clarity and the confidence to confront him, and to ensure that he could no longer hide behind his deceit. And yet, even with all this preparation, a part of me couldn't help but feel a lingering sadness. I had loved him once, truly and completely. And now, that love was gone, replaced by the cold clarity of someone who had been betrayed. I mourned the version of us that had never existed, the trust that had been shattered, and the illusions that had been carefully constructed to deceive me. But even in that sorrow, I found strength. Betrayal had a way of revealing who we truly are. And through this pain, I had discovered resilience, determination, and a sense of justice that would guide me through the confrontation that was coming. I closed my journal that night, my heart steady, my mind focused. The plan was set. The truth was documented. And I knew, without a doubt, that when the time came, I would finally confront him, not as someone who had been deceived, but as someone who had regained control of her life, her dignity, and her power. Even with a plan in place, the nights were the hardest. Alone in my apartment, I felt the weight of everything. The betrayal, the lies, the years of trust I had freely given. It wasn't just anger that I felt. It was a storm of emotions swirling inside me, each one demanding attention, each one refusing to be ignored. I questioned myself constantly. Was I overreacting? Could I forgive him if I confronted him now? Was my desire for justice overshadowing the possibility of moving on? These thoughts plagued me, especially in the quiet moments when I was alone with my mind. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave everything behind and pretend none of it ever happened. I imagined packing my bags and leaving the apartment, starting fresh somewhere he couldn't follow. The idea was tempting. Simple, clean, and almost painless. But another part of me, the part that had been wounded and silenced for too long, wouldn't allow it. I remembered every broken promise, every lie, every excuse I had believed. I recalled the nights I stayed awake, waiting for him, only to be left alone. I thought about the manipulation I hadn't even realized until recently, the way he twisted situations to make me doubt myself. And in those memories, I found clarity. I wasn't just hurt. I had been underestimated. And I wouldn't let that happen again. Sleep became a stranger. I spent countless nights staring at the ceiling, imagining the confrontation over and over. I played different scenarios in my head, what he would say, how he would react, the moment his carefully constructed world would start to unravel. Each time I felt a mix of fear and anticipation, fear of facing him and anticipation of seeing the truth finally come to light. I also grappled with the part of me that still loved him. It was a strange, confusing emotion. I remembered the good times, the laughter, the shared secrets, the moments when I believed in him completely. Those memories made my chest ache. How could someone capable of creating such joy also be capable of such betrayal? It was a question I couldn't answer, but I knew I had to accept it. Anger was another constant companion. It wasn't the sharp, explosive anger that comes from a sudden betrayal. It was a deep, simmering fury that grew stronger each day. It fueled my determination, reminded me why I couldn't back down, why I had to see this through. But I reminded myself constantly, this wasn't about revenge born of anger. It was about justice, about reclaiming what was rightfully mine, my dignity, my peace, my self-respect. Even amid this emotional turmoil, I had moments of reflection. I thought about who I was becoming. I was no longer just the woman he had deceived. I was someone stronger, wiser, more aware. The betrayal had forced me to grow in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had learned patience, observation, and the value of strategy. I had discovered that strength doesn't always roar. It often waits quietly, gathers evidence, and strikes with precision. There were nights when doubt crept in. What if I misread something? What if I was being too harsh? But then, I remembered the evidence, the messages, the lies, each one a reminder that my feelings weren't imagined. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't being paranoid. I had been deceived, and now it was time to confront that truth. I also had to face my own vulnerabilities. Betrayal exposes weaknesses, and I realized that I had been blind in many ways. I had trusted blindly, assumed the best, and ignored subtle warnings. But acknowledging my vulnerability didn't make me weak. It made me aware, and awareness was power. During this period, I also became more attuned to his behavior. Every word, every glance, every pause held meaning. I could sense when he was lying, when he was nervous, when he thought he had me fooled, and each observation strengthened my resolve. I wasn't just planning a confrontation, I was preparing to reclaim control of my life. By the end of these sleepless nights, I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't free from anger or sadness, but I had transformed my emotions into focus. I was ready. I knew what I had to do, and I knew I had the strength to see it through. Even in the darkest moments, I held on to a single thought. I would not be broken by betrayal. I would not be silenced by lies. I would face him, armed not with cruelty, but with truth, evidence, and the quiet confidence of someone who knew their worth. And so, as the nights passed, I grew stronger, sharper, and more determined. The confrontation that once seemed impossible now felt inevitable. I was ready to face him, to uncover the final truths, and to ensure that he understood the consequences of his betrayal. The day I had been anticipating for weeks finally arrived. I woke up with a strange mix of dread and determination. My heart was pounding, my mind sharp and focused. Today was the day I would confront him, not with anger, not with tears, but with the quiet confidence of someone who knew every truth he had tried to hide. I prepared carefully. Every detail mattered. I had the evidence laid out. Messages, screenshots, timelines, even notes from conversations he thought I had forgotten. I reviewed everything again, making sure nothing was missing. There could be no mistake. I needed him to understand that this confrontation wasn't emotional hysteria. It was undeniable fact. When he arrived home that evening, I greeted him as usual. The smile on my face was calm, almost casual, but beneath it, a storm brewed. He sensed something immediately. There was a subtle change in my demeanor, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. I asked him to sit, and he did, curious but unaware of the weight of what was coming. I took a deep breath and began, slowly, deliberately. "I know everything," I said. At first, he laughed nervously, thinking I was joking. "What do you mean?" he asked, attempting to deflect, to regain control of the conversation. I didn't smile. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing my emotions on display. Instead, I started presenting the evidence. Every message, every lie, every plan he had meticulously hidden from me. I explained the patterns, the inconsistencies, the secrets. I spoke calmly, clearly, without rage, letting the facts speak for themselves. His laughter faded. His confident facade began to crumble. I watched him closely, noting every micro-expression, the hesitation in his eyes, the tightening of his jaw, the subtle shift in posture. He had believed he could manipulate me, but now he was realizing that the truth had been quietly collected, waiting for this exact moment. He opened his mouth to speak, to protest, but I held up a hand. "Let me finish," I said. "This isn't about anger. This is about truth. Every lie you've told, every promise you've broken, it's all here. And now you have to face it." He faltered, struggling for words, clearly unprepared for the calm certainty in my voice. He tried excuses, explanations, deflections, but I countered each one with evidence. There was no room for denial. There was no way to twist the facts. The web of deception he had spun so carefully was unraveling right before him. I could see the fear growing in his eyes, not the casual fear of getting caught in a small lie, but the genuine realization that his actions had consequences. He looked at me, searching for a hint of the vulnerable woman he thought he could manipulate, but all I offered was clarity, control, and truth. At that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. Years of doubt, confusion, and heartbreak were finally converging into clarity. I wasn't just confronting him, I was reclaiming my life, my dignity, and my power. And I could see the shift happening in him. Shock, fear, and the realization that he had underestimated me. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't shout. I let the facts hit him with the force of their weight. Each lie exposed was a revelation, and each revelation left him more speechless than the last. By the end, he was quiet, staring at me with an expression I had never seen before. Genuine fear, the fear of someone losing control for the first time. I ended the confrontation with a simple statement. You thought you could deceive me, control me, and hide the truth. But I was always paying attention. And now it's over. The choice is yours. You can face what you've done, or you can live with the consequences. He didn't respond immediately. The room was silent except for the sound of rain tapping against the window. I felt a mix of triumph and sadness. Triumph, because I had finally revealed the truth and regained my power. Sadness, because the person I had loved so deeply had been capable of such deception. But most of all, I felt clarity. The confrontation was not about revenge. It was about justice. I had remained composed, collected, and in control. I had turned the tables without losing myself, without compromising my dignity. And in that moment, I realized something important. Confronting betrayal is never easy, but it is necessary. It strips away illusions, reveals hidden truths, and restores the balance that deception had disrupted. I had faced the storm, and now I stood calm and unshaken, ready for the next chapter of my life. After the confrontation, I felt a strange calm wash over me. The truth was finally out, the lies exposed. But I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't enough for him to simply know that I was aware. I needed to ensure that his actions had consequences, without losing the control I had so carefully maintained. I had spent weeks documenting everything, and now it was time to use that evidence. But I didn't want to humiliate him in anger, nor did I want to stoop to petty revenge. I wanted justice, clarity, and closure, for myself and for everyone affected by his deceit. I started with the people closest to him, friends, family, and colleagues who had been unknowingly caught in his web of manipulation. I shared the truth calmly, showing the evidence I had collected. Each revelation was presented factually, without emotion, letting the weight of the truth speak for itself. The reactions were immediate: shock, disbelief, and a subtle shift in the way he was perceived. He had always relied on appearances, on the careful image he projected to the world. And now, that image was crumbling. The control he had taken for granted was slipping through his fingers, and I watched it happen with a quiet satisfaction. Not from cruelty, but from knowing that honesty had finally won. I also made sure to protect myself in the process. I didn't attack him personally or spread rumors. I simply presented the truth to those who mattered, letting the facts speak louder than words ever could. The effect was undeniable. His credibility, carefully built over years, began to unravel. People started seeing the discrepancies, the contradictions, and the patterns of deceit that I had uncovered. Meanwhile, I focused on reclaiming my own life. I set boundaries, clarified expectations, and refused to let him manipulate me further. Every interaction was now on my terms, every conversation guided by the clarity I had gained. He no longer held power over me, and I felt lighter for it, freer than I had in months. At first, he tried to regain control, attempting excuses, explanations, and half-hearted apologies, but I remained composed. I had learned patience, strategy, and emotional control through this ordeal. His attempts to manipulate me now felt almost laughable. I had already seen the truth, and I had already prepared for every scenario. The most satisfying part was the realization that the consequences were natural, not forced. He was facing the results of his choices without my needing to orchestrate cruelty. His reputation was affected, his credibility questioned, and the trust he had taken for granted shattered. Justice had been served, not through anger, but through careful planning, evidence, and integrity. Even in these moments, I reminded myself to stay grounded. This wasn't about revenge as others imagine it. It was about balance. It was about ensuring that betrayal did not go unchecked, and that trust, once broken, was acknowledged and respected. I had regained not just my dignity, but my confidence in discerning truth from deception. As I reflected on this process, I realized the greatest victory wasn't exposing him. It was discovering my own strength. I had been hurt, deceived, and manipulated, yet I emerged composed, strategic, and in control. The betrayal could not define me. It could not diminish my worth. And that realization was far more empowering than any act of retribution. By the end of this chapter, I knew I had done everything I could to protect myself, assert my boundaries, and restore the balance that betrayal had disrupted. And more importantly, I had learned that standing firm, acting with strategy, and maintaining integrity were the true tools of empowerment in the face of deception. I finally allowed myself a deep breath, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. The confrontation had been intense, the exposure calculated, and the consequences unfolding. But I had remained true to myself throughout. I had ensured justice without compromising my own values. And that, I realized, was the ultimate form of victory. After the confrontation and the exposure of his lies, a quiet settled over my life, an almost surreal calm. It was as if the storm of betrayal that had consumed me for months had finally passed. I felt lighter, freer, but also reflective. The events had left their mark, not just on him, but on me. And as I sat alone one evening, I realized how much I had learned, not just about him, but about myself. Betrayal, I discovered, is never just about the person who deceives. It's a test of strength, awareness, and resilience. It forces you to confront uncomfortable truths about yourself, your choices, and your capacity to trust. I had loved him, trusted him, and believed in him completely. And yes, I had been hurt. But in facing that pain, I discovered a version of myself I hadn't known existed. A version that was stronger, wiser, and unafraid to stand up for what she deserved. I thought about the people who had been caught in the middle, the friends and family who had been misled by his lies. I realized the importance of transparency, honesty, and accountability. Deception may momentarily shield someone from consequences, but truth always finds a way to surface. And when it does, it changes everything. For myself, the journey had been transformative. I had learned patience, strategy, and emotional control. I had learned to observe, document, and act with clarity. I had learned that revenge in the form of rage or malice is fleeting, but reclaiming your dignity, setting boundaries, and standing firm in truth is lasting. Most importantly, I realized that trust is a treasure. It can be broken, manipulated, or taken for granted, but it can also be rebuilt with care, honesty, and respect. And when it's broken beyond repair, the lesson lies not in resentment, but in growth. Learning to value yourself, your instincts, and your choices above anyone else's deception. As I reflected, I felt a deep sense of closure. I no longer carried the anger that had once threatened to consume me. I didn't need to punish him further. His actions had already led to their natural consequences. My victory was quiet but profound. I had taken control, reclaimed my power, and emerged intact. I thought about the love I had once felt, the illusions I had believed in, and the reality that had replaced them. It was painful, yes, but it was also liberating. I understood now that betrayal, while deeply hurtful, can be a catalyst for self-discovery, empowerment, and clarity. For anyone who has faced betrayal, I want you to know this. The pain is real, but so is your strength. You have the power to observe, to understand, and to act with dignity. You don't need to seek revenge through malice. Instead, focus on reclaiming your life, your peace, and your sense of self-worth. That is the truest victory. And as I look back on this chapter of my life, I smile, not because of the betrayal, but because of what it taught me. I am stronger. I am wiser. I am unshakable. And in that strength, I have found freedom. So if you've ever been betrayed, remember this. It's not the lies that define you. It's how you rise after them. Stand firm, trust your instincts, and never let anyone make you doubt your value. Because the greatest justice comes not from punishing others, but from reclaiming your own power, your peace, and your life. Life has a way of testing us in ways we never expect. Betrayal can feel like a storm, leaving you confused, hurt, and questioning everything you believed in. But as I learned through my experience, it also offers a unique opportunity, a chance to rise stronger, wiser, and more aware than before. I faced deception, heartbreak, and manipulation. I confronted the truth, reclaimed my dignity, and ensured that justice, in its quietest and most powerful form, was served. And through it all, I discovered something far more valuable than revenge: the strength to protect myself, the wisdom to recognize the truth, and the courage to never let anyone undermine my worth again. If you've ever felt betrayed, remember this: the pain is real, but so is your power. Observe carefully, act wisely, and reclaim your peace. Revenge doesn't have to be cruel to be effective. Sometimes the quiet triumph of truth and integrity is more powerful than anything else. And to all of you watching right now, if Selena Pierce's story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories of betrayal, suspense, and justice. Every week, we bring you stories that will shock, move, and inspire you. Stories that remind us all of the power of truth and resilience. Thank you for listening to this journey. Remember, life may test your trust, but your strength lies in how you rise after betrayal. Stand tall, trust yourself, and never let anyone take your power away.